you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Boger,
Here.
Councilmember Lindsay,
Here.
Councilmember McDaniel,
Here.
Councilmember Greenlee, Councilmember Shoemaker,
Here.
Councilmember Freeman,
Here.
Councilmember Blinsky.
Understand Councilmember Polinsky will not be here for this meeting, but should be here for the regular meeting. Dawn, anything you'd like to bring up from public comments?
No, sir.
Okay.
The people didn't with triple, as you like to hear, I'm sure.
Are we going to do a newspaper tax?
No,
No.
you're not going to get a recommendation for one anyway. Under new business, we're going to come back to item A. Dave has arranged to have that presentation done remotely. So the individual doing that isn't quite ready to get on there yet. Trev, do you want to go ahead and talk to us about some discount pricing for combined burials?
Absolutely. So it's been trending in the cemetery business for cremation and specifically for niche walls. And so we've seen a high demand for that. Inside of our conventional casket buries, customers have the ability to do 3 additional cremains added into the casket. And so lots of times, depending on the timing, after an individual passes away in their cremain, they're able to wait until they can actually memorialize it, add it into the casket, or add it into the niche wall with another beloved or significant other. And the services that we've been rendering on that have been full price, whereas we could discount that at 50% since we're already opening it up for an excavation or opening the niche wall doors to actually put that actual cremain into the niche wall. So this has been discussed with cemetery board and brought forward from staff that it should be a discounted price for that second cremain to be memorialized, whether it's in a casket or in the niche wall.
Excuse me, is that at the same time or at a later date?
Same time.
What
So
happened?
as we open or close.
Okay, so what if, like, a spouse or somebody wants to be buried in the same plot at a different time, like years later? Can that be done?
If the cremains have been set aside, we can do it simultaneously. But as far as
You don't open again and-
interment, no. It would have to be a simultaneous service request.
In the niche wall, can you do that?
We can in the niche wall, but then we're handling the panels again as
Right.
far as labor. Because right now, the way it's been framed, the services that are rendered, since we're putting either 1 urn in or 2, it's just a matter of opening it up and discounting that second one, whether it's being buried with a casket or put inside the niche wall.
So basically, you're just taking it back to charging for one opening of whatever it is if we only have one.
Right,
opening,
like a-
regardless of what's being placed.
Yeah, so the actual hard and fast cost of the lot or niche fee is not under consideration, it's the service fee. And so like a conventional bury for an adult casket burial is $600, and a niche and a interment is $300. The $300 would go to $150, be discounted 50% because we've already got it opened up for the services that have been requested. And this is a simultaneous service in regards to your inquiry.
Any other questions for Trevor? We got this on the agenda for a little bit later tonight.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll take Mitch.
Okay.
Up to you.
How much time? No, I think
5
we should
minutes
take
ago,
Mitch.
so.
Yeah.
Mitch, come on up. Let's talk about a continuation of a moratorium for recreational marijuana.
On the agenda this evening is an agenda bill under consent agenda for the continuation of the moratorium related to recreational marijuana. If you recall, when we adopted this originally, we had hoped that the legislature would probably do something different and try to address and consolidate medical, and with that, they haven't done that, didn't do that. The moratorium is set to expire on June 2nd. Other municipalities around us have continued the moratoriums. Camas is going until October, Ridgefield till November. Vancouver is licensing them, and Battleground is not changing anything. They're just letting them go as far as industrial and commercial uses. My my recommendation as part of the agenda bill is to continue that moratorium. That allows us to, gives us more time to see what happens in other jurisdictions. There are some probably lawsuits still pending. There's City of Kent that's still kind of going on, but it also doesn't really put us in the crosshairs for anything related to letting those uses go. It is within your privilege then to also look at doing something else. If you want to look at prohibiting it, you can definitely look at that. But as I said, my recommendation is to continue it and allow us more time for us to see what happens in other municipalities. So on the agenda is to set the hearing for that continuation of the moratorium.
And for 6 months moratorium?
6 months, yes.
Brent?
Jurisdictions in Washington have banned marijuana. They're within their boundaries,
Yes,
correct?
correct.
Have you looked at that possibility, doing that, just presenting because I
Yep.
you know, either ban it or don't, and if we just didn't do anything,
Right.
I guess say, i.e. in voting down a ban, and the moratorium expired, basically we would have a situation where they'd be treated like any other retail use, correct?
Correct. Yeah, and I think that the one thing about the Kent case and doing some of that research that I saw, that what it really did was, in my opinion, what it does is really forces the legislature to look at it, to make that decision. And it can't keep kicking that can. They have to look at it. They have to look at how they're going to put the two together and do all of that. Again, I don't see us or the desire for us to run out in front and develop regulations for it when it could, in fact, change considerably. Also, by just putting out a prohibition right now and just saying, no, we ban it completely, I think that kind of puts some crosshairs on us that I would like to try to avoid. That's why my recommendation is that let's just continue the moratorium.
But other jurisdictions have,
Yeah, they have.
and so there we would be not at the very front.
Not at the very front,
Because
no.
they're bigger. I think
We're a
so.
little bit faster running, I
Yeah.
guess, and
So how many more do you approximately, do you know?
How many have banned it?
How many have banned?
I have no idea.
well, yeah, there's a
Pierce
handful.
County, Kent,
Kent has, yes, Kent's the one that.
I'm not aware of any. Clark County basically has.
Clark County, they have, on the 27th as well, they will have a hearing on it. And they have developed regulations, although they have a caveat on there which are similar to other jurisdictions that basically says none of this means anything until the feds basically change the law. And that they have that on the books. And they also, there's other municipalities that have the same thing that says we can't permit anything that violates federal, state, or local law. So that's
Camas,
their,
for example.
yeah. They have that now, but Camas is actually looking at, they adopted a moratorium as well.
I want to be clear on something. I wouldn't support a ban, but I think it is more honest than doing rolling moratoriums that we've been doing. So I'm not going to support a moratorium. I would support consideration of a ban. I wouldn't vote for it, but I would support a hearing on that. One of the things that I would throw out for council consideration is putting it up to a vote of the people inside Washougal and let them decide. I generally think that a lot of times when councils do that, they're accused of passing the buck and saying, well, you need to step up and make the decisions. Well, this is a decision that the public can, I think, pretty well understand, and it doesn't have a lot of complexity. The city voted narrowly against I-502, 28 votes out of 6,000, I think, cast. Let's see if their opinions change. Let's see what would happen. I don't think it's really passing the buck. Before we do that, there's some legal issues, whether it's a matter that can be given to the voters to decide. Our city attorney would need to look at that, but I think that's something the council ought to consider.
Certainly call it an advisory vote.
Or call it an advisory vote.
Well, are we getting ready to go into a survey? Can that be part of the survey?
Yeah, it won't come back, that work won't be done likely before
Oh,
this
timing.
Mid-July.
expires.
Well, But we could still do a moratorium right
I
now.
would support a moratorium.
And then include that in the survey.
I would support a moratorium until the vote. I could support that.
So this would take us into
December.
into December, which won't get us into next session.
No.
So if we're waiting for the legislature, there'd be another one, and that would be the home stretch of the session, potentially. So that might not even be enough. They may not decide this until mid to late June. Depends on where it's at with everything else going on.
I have no problem with sorry.
That's all right, go ahead, you start.
I have no problem continuing a moratorium until Washington and the feds agree. I don't think it's our job
That could be a long
to make
time.
that, well, then I think we should just keep passing a moratorium.
There are legal problems with that.
You can't do it forever, but you could ban it.
No.
Jennifer?
I'm probably on the opposite end of my fellow council member Boger. I actually do not believe that this is a good business for Sugar, and I do not want to see this business in our city. I'm willing to continue with moratoriums if that's what it takes. I would also consider a ban, so.
I didn't say it was good business for Washougal.
Correct me if I'm wrong, even if we go forward tonight with setting the hearing for the next meeting, we have that hearing, you could either continue the moratorium or even take a vote for a ban at that point as well. You don't need a hearing for a ban.
No.
We would probably
It would be
need
part of the zoning
verbiage.
ordinance, wouldn't it?
It depends on how we do it. We would need to research that. If it is in the zoning code, then the code requires us to go through the planning commission.
That's a good
Yes.
point.
I don't believe that we have time to appropriately institute a ban before the expiration of the current moratorium.
We do not.
We do not have time, so
Okay,
it's not even.
that is
That helps answer that
Reason
question.
number one
Yes.
to go ahead and extend the moratorium.
Right.
Paul?
Harry Truman once said that he was looking for a one-handed economist. So I'm going to be an economist and do an on the one hand, on the other hand. On the one hand, I certainly understand. I am unwilling to be out front on any of this. I would like to learn from other people's mistakes, and that means that we need to give them time to make those mistakes. I certainly could understand why somebody might want to restrict this to industrial zoning in the same way that we have adult businesses. It's been fairly successful. There are no adult businesses in Washougal. On the other hand, many of the ill effects of marijuana at the moment under the present regime have a lot to do with its black market situation. If we think back to the 1920s and Al Capone,
I can't think that far back.
that's
I don't want to think that far back.
we have cartels here which do that, criminal cartels. The argument has been made, and I think fairly successfully in Colorado, that what you need to do actually is bring it out into the light of day, as public as possible. That if you do so, that brings new scrutiny to it that is not available right now. For example, there's really no difference between selling pot to me and selling it to a 12-year-old child. Once we have legal marijuana, that changes dramatically. So I'm very much of two minds here. My own view is that we should extend the moratorium at least until September. On the other hand, I'm always a little worried about spending somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 to do an election issue. So I don't have a really clear position on this. I'm going to be the economist on the one hand and on the other hand. That's it.
David?
I have a very clear position on it. I'm against it. And I will vote for the moratorium as many times as it comes up. I'll vote for a ban if it comes up. And if it doesn't come up, I'll bring it up. My reasoning is very simple. My background is, and my academic training presupposes me to look at the evidence. And as I look at the evidence, here's what I find. Colorado is a disaster. The police don't have a test to determine whether or not somebody's using marijuana and driving and it's impairing their driving. There is a blood test, but you have to get a court order to do it. Even so, the number of marijuana-related impaired driving arrests are going up. I look at countries like the Netherlands and Portugal, who got on this bandwagon 20 years ago and created a very libertine environment. And I look at the results for them. They don't have fewer people on hard drugs, they have more. They have more people on marijuana, and they're starting to retrench. They're starting to say, let's take another look at this, let's make it less available, let's regulate it more, let's go the other direction than we went 20 years ago. It's turned out to be a disaster. So I'm looking at all the evidence, and I don't see anything in favor of this. And I disagree, Paul, that it isn't clear. It's very clear to me. The studies are out there, the evidence is out there, and I just can't be in favor of this. And I think it is inherent in our charter as council members to make decisions for the people of Washougal. God grant that we make the right ones for the people of Washougal and for the people of the surrounding areas that are affected by our decisions. But I feel an obligation to make a decision on this one, and I'll tell you in advance what my decision is going to be. And I will press very hard to convince my colleagues to go along with me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Brent?
Half the voters in Washougal voted for I-502. I think their views need to be considered in this matter, and contrary to what Councilmember McDaniel said, I don't necessarily think this is a good use for Washougal, good thing for Washougal to have, but I do think that the state has passed this law and that we need to pay attention to that law, or at least let our voters decide what they think about it.
Other comments, discussion? You've got it on your agenda tonight, consent agenda for setting the hearing itself, so. Joyce, did you have?
No, I just want to say I will support a moratorium. I would like to see the state step up and assume more responsibility or make some changes in the legislature. I think that I'm very happy for us to buy time.
What was the vote in Washougal?
49.9 yes, 50.1 no.
Okay.
28 votes.
So the question for us is not so much, this isn't a democracy, this is a Republican form of government. This is a republic. We're tasked with, by the people, we're tasked with making decisions on their behalf. I'm willing to stake my tenure on this council on that decision. And I don't think that booting this to the people for an advisory vote's a good idea.
So we shouldn't have advisory votes on taxes either then?
I think that's a much more serious issue. It affects the economic well-being of our people. And giving the misuse of our taxes at so many levels, that one I think does deserve an advisory vote. And I understand you might feel differently.
I think they both do.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Broger and I are often on opposite ends of an issue, but we tolerate each other
You're
well.
doing fine. Any other items, any other things that Mitch can answer? Conjo?
Oh, Mitch can't answer this. I just wanted to speak up and say, for those that voted against it, I'm a mother. I'm a mother of a son who struggles. And I will fight to the teeth that this is a gateway drug. And I'll tell you how else I know that, because I lived through the 60s. And a lot of people at this table know exactly what I'm talking about. We started somewhere, and we watched a lot of our friends, family, loved ones go really far down that path of wrong decisions based on starting out with pot. I don't want to see our community support this. I don't want to see it in my community. I don't want to make it easy on anybody. And so I appreciate, Jennifer, that you spoke up. I know those of you that are willing to wait for the state to make its decision. Yes, eventually we have to make a decision, but we don't have to do it right now.
Can I say one thing? It's not like marijuana isn't very prevalent in our community now.
That's true.
And when Paul talks about the 12-year-old or grade school or junior high kids, it's available. So it's not like it's not going to be here one day and it's going to be here the next day. My feeling is I would like to see it out in the open and stop the illegal trade. But I don't feel that the time is now. But I would like it not to be illegal. And it's a very sophisticated distribution system of illegal marijuana through our state. And I would like that stopped.
I personally wonder why it goes on, but that's a law enforcement issue. That's another issue altogether, that it's not, the laws are on the books, they're not enforced. So it trickles down to us in the cities. Now we have to deal with it on our strip malls or wherever. No, it's in our industrial areas. That's the reason it's still prevalent, is because the laws aren't enforced. That's wrong.
Well, I'm hoping that we would someplace get some revenue from the state to help our police enforce the laws. That's what I'm hoping will happen through the legislature.
I appreciate that I'm in the minority here. And I don't mean to give advice to the people that, I agree with you many other times. I don't disagree with you that much, Dave. Don't. But I think the better way to do this, if this is the way the council wants to go, and I think it appears that it is just to ban it, and so we don't have to have these moratoriums coming back, serially. It's just not honest. I mean, basically the idea behind moratoriums is you're studying things, and we're not necessarily studying anything right now. So if that's the majority, if that's the council's will, I would support a resolution to consider a ban. I wouldn't vote for the ban, but I'd consider a resolution supporting it. I won't vote for a moratorium.
I think the reason for the moratorium is that the feds and the state haven't gotten their act together yet. And I'm looking at prosecutions taking place at the federal level in eastern Washington for pot growers. And the unfortunate thing is that these pot growers, some of them had guns in their homes, and then that becomes a weapon-related felony and incurs higher penalties, greater prison time. So I until the state and the feds get their act together, I don't see how we can even consider it.
Well, the bans are phrased in a way that they ban the use until it's lawful under federal law.
Mm-hmm.
Well, see,
That's how some of them are phrased.
Yes.
that's what we need
That's
to,
the kind of thing that would
we
be
need to be
presented.
educated on that.
Would you not join us in voting for that?
I wouldn't, no, I wouldn't, but I would join in urging consideration of that.
And again, what we're bringing this to you for at the moment is just to set a hearing tonight to have this whole discussion 2 weeks from tonight. So, Paul?
I was just going to underline something that Dave said. To study it is not the only reason for a moratorium. we can certainly have a moratorium while we wait for the legislature to sort it out. One of my most serious problems with this is that an ounce of marijuana, leaf marijuana, is allowed, and up to a pound of marijuana infusion. I had somebody tell me they could produce an ounce of liquid that would keep the city of Tacoma high for a month. Until the legislature can sort that out, along with the vaping issue and all of the other associated problems, which they really cannot do until 2 years after 502 passed.
Next year.
I'm sorry?
Next year.
Next year. So I certainly think that a moratorium is the right way to go.
I just, for point of clarification, I believe the RCWs refers to studies in the moratorium.
Work
statute
plan.
Authorizing
Yes.
work plan. So I think under the RCWs at least, a moratorium has to have a purpose behind it of continuing studies and all that. You might be able to say that you're going to do this, but I don't think that's really in your plan, is it?
It's not, but we have in the past also relied on, when we had evidence that the state legislature was going to take up the issue, we relied on that, and we felt that that was reason for us to allow that moratorium to, or recommend that moratorium continue. I think we're in the same boat, but like Dave said, you know, this will take us through December. That's still not enough time, so we would be back in December asking the question again, if we were still going to have that to wait, and then it would be back in front of you all again in order to continue the moratorium at that time. Again, from where I sit, you know, I think that it's the right thing to do is to continue that moratorium to allow that time to take place. I don't particularly, I'm not a fan of moratoriums per se, but at the same time, banning it completely, obviously there's work that has to be done with the planning commission level as well, but we could do that, and I'm willing to do that with whatever the council brings forward. But my recommendation would be to continue that moratorium.
We'll certainly continue to study it, but our level of study is going to be what other communities are doing and
Yes.
what the effects of that are. So, much more than that. Connie Jo?
I would very much appreciate an education on what a ban is, because I'm hearing things that I've never had to deal with before. So,
I have some examples of language I can.
Yeah, we would, basically, that's why we would put it in the zoning code that says that it's not an allowed use within the city of Washougal. And that, because we're putting it in the zoning code, we would go through a legislative process that involves the planning commission as well.
Tracy?
I just have a question, and then a ban means you can't sell it or grow it or produce it here. But if you bought it in Vancouver, you could come in and smoke it. Or
Correct.
if you bought it illegally,
Not in
you could
public.
smoke it in the city. So it's not stopping it. It's just stopping the production.
Production,
or-
processing, and retail
Okay.
use of
For
it.
retail sales.
The businesses surrounding, you know, that particular industry.
Right.
Here's how the bans read. No use that is illegal under local, state, or federal law shall be allowed in any zone within the city, Yakima and Grandview, Richland, Lakewood, there are actually a fair amount of cities that have done this, Yakima, Grandview, Richland, Lakewood, SeaTac, Oakdale, I don't even know where Oakdale is. No application for a marijuana licensed business shall be approved by Pierce County until such time as marijuana is removed from the schedule of controlled substances at 21 U.S.C. Section 812C.
That's what the county's going to do.
Pierce, yeah, and then Kent's collective gardens are prohibited in the following zoning districts, and they specify all of them.
What is the suit in Kent that's happening?
But that was over medical marijuana, and they've tried to assert that law provided a right to have the use, but actually only provides a right to, it's an affirmative defense to criminal prosecution for the use. Any violation of this section is declared to be a public nuisance per se and shall be abated, so we could declare it a public nuisance if we wanted to. No marijuana dispensary will be allowed a business license or be legal according to federal law, Mossy Rock. So there are a number of ways to phrase the law, and
Yeah, and it's pretty straightforward way to, I mean, it would be, it wouldn't be a broad question to the planning commission that they'd have to, really delve into, but we do have to go through that process of changing the code and running it through to them. Definitely could not have that done by the 2nd of June.
So do you need a direction from us to move forward with putting some verbiage together for the planning commission?
Only, I think that,
Jed?
not yet, at the hearing, if there was maybe some direction at that time.
So tonight, we'll, presumably on consent, the council will set the public hearing for May 27th, where you will take testimony on whether or not to have another moratorium. And I think that if we got direction from the council, if there was a resolution or otherwise we got a majority of the council directing us to bring you through the planning commission a ban, some mechanism for a ban, then we would get to work on that right away.
But I would recommend that the moratorium be continued until such
Right.
So
time.
your recommendation is this moratorium.
Right.
Let me,
Do you have an opinion on once that expires?
If
At
it,
this point?
no,
No opinion yet?
no,
Okay.
because then nothing would have changed by the time that this one expires.
also let me clarify, if we have a moratorium that we're just putting in place long enough to get a ban properly considered through the planning commission, I could go along with that. So a shorter, we don't have to take the full 6 months.
We do not.
So,
No, no. Okay. Good. Thanks, Mitch.
Thank you.
Brent, the reason I would support the 6 months is simply because it's difficult to predict whether or not you're going to be able to get it done in 3 or 4 or whatever.
I know, but I'm a land use lawyer, that's one of my things I've done. And ever since I was this high, they told me, you don't do rolling moratoriums, you either, you do something, you make a final decision, and.
Make a decision.
And I've been here in the council now for almost 2 years, and we were into one when I was here, when I started, so it's time to do one thing or the other.
The rationale is still the same, though. that-
Actually, the moratorium.
Hey, Ron, it's
when you
Dave.
came here was
We're through that
bad for
item,
marijuana.
so we're ready to go. I'm going to put you on
No, we-
It's
speaker.
not the same.
We still have that, though. We still have a medical marijuana moratorium.
Okay.
Can you hear me, Ron?
Professional services agreement.
I can. Have you guys can hear me?
Let me turn the volume up. Can you say hello again, to see if we can hear you?
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you. We're doing our best here. Just do your best to speak up. So I'm going to,
Can people hear me now?
Yes.
there we go, that's good. Ron, I'll make a brief introduction and then I'll turn it over to you and we'll walk through the slides.
Okay, great.
So council, on your agenda tonight is a professional, on consent is a professional services agreement to enter into a contract with ETC Institute, who is a provider of community surveys and other related services. The cost for that is $14,450. As you know, that's already appropriated in your budget under the strategic planning initiatives. And what we have is a presentation that describes this company, describes the process that we would undertake to perform the community survey and what you would expect from the scope of services and the type of report and information that we would receive from that. So I will turn it over to Ron Vine, let him introduce himself and his role with ETC, and then Ron will walk through the slides.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Dave. Well, my name is Ron Vine. I'm a principal with the ETC Institute. We're a market research firm out of the Kansas City area that has conducted surveys across the country in 46 states. And we're home based in the Kansas City area. And I appreciate very much you allowing us to give this presentation at a remote site. I actually am sitting in a Hampton Inn across the street from the University of Illinois, where I went to school 40 years ago. So it's kind of nostalgic for me. I had a presentation in Champaign earlier this evening, so I appreciate your opportunity. Can everybody hear me fairly well?
Yes.
Okay, great. So just kind of taking through, as I indicated, our firm has worked on market research, local government organizations in 46 states, 400 cities. And looking at the fourth slide, you can see that we have experience in both larger communities like Austin, Texas, and Dallas, and Fairfax County, Virginia, and Fort Worth, and Miami-Dade. And we have experience with a number of cities in the Northwest, including King County, Olympia, Shoreline, Washington, who's been a client of mine for about 15 years now. And we're actually just starting the fifth Direction Finder survey for them, which is the survey we would be conducting for your community. So we have a lot of experience working in Washington and in the Seattle area, and I've been to the state of Washington numerous times working with Shoreline and other communities. Next slide, please. As I indicated, our firm, 95% of our business is market research for governmental entities, and of that, 70% of our businesses are doing surveys for city and counties. Direction Find, which is the customer satisfaction survey that we would be working with you on, is our largest line of business, but we also do a tremendous amount of transportation surveys, parks and recreation surveys, library surveys, and surveys for school districts. As you can see, we have extensive capabilities for doing phone, mail, internet surveys, all in-house, and we do a lot of surveys in foreign languages, particularly in Texas and Florida and in California. But we have all of these in-house capabilities, and also we could contract with firms, with other people if you have any other foreign language needs. Next slide, please. Looks like my... Dave?
Yes.
Sorry, my computer seems to be stuck for a second. Can you hold on for 1 second? I apologize.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Okay. Slide 6, you can see that this is a benefit slide. And really, when you're doing a survey, when you start it at the very, very beginning, all the way through the process of reviewing the work, the sampling plan, the survey design, et cetera, you're building benefits and consensus throughout the entire process. So, the key is to be looking in, building trust and transparency in everything in the survey so that it's tailored specifically to your community. That starts with step 1, which is designing the sampling plan. It's very important that it ensures the results are representative of the city's diverse population. So even though we've done surveys in numerous other communities, we've never done a survey for you. So we want to make sure that that survey is representative of your community. The sample will be self-addressed. We'll include cell phones. We'll capture and identify registered voters. In the second step, we'll design the survey instrument. The real key is that we're going to develop that in partnership with you all. We're going to do it in partnership with the council, with the city administration. We're going to identify your benchmarking needs. Generally, it takes 2 to 4 drafts of the survey before it's ready to go out on the streets. It has to be approved by you prior to us doing it, because that's the real key, is we only have one chance to do the survey right. Third step is actually the pre-survey communication or press releases to newspapers, automated call to residents. We suggest that call come from the city council, possibly the mayor, just alerting them that the survey is coming in the mail and that their input is extremely important. Website option is something that we would recommend. But again, right from the beginning, we want to build trust. We want to encourage participation. We want to set the stage for implementing what comes out of the survey. Step 4 is a pilot test. Before we put the survey in the mail, we want to make sure that people can answer the survey. So we're going to do it over the phone, random sampling of 30 residents. They provide feedback to make sure that they interpret the questions right, to make sure that there's a level of comfort in answering the questions, to make sure that the survey can be completed by people, find out if there's any concerns with the process, any ideas for increasing the response rate, and if there's any questions at all, we're going to get back to you before we administer the survey and resolve those so that everything goes smoothly. Step 5 is administering the survey. As indicated before, we're going to select a random sampling of residents and businesses. We recommend a multi-channel methodology. It's in our proposal. A mail survey, internet options, follow-up by phone. The phone follow-ups is to make sure that the sampling is representative of the community and also that we get the guaranteed number of returns. We're going to geocode the surveys. That means it's going to go on to specific addresses, so we'll be able to track the longitude and longitude of anybody who returns the survey, and so you'll be able to enter it into a GIS database, map out the results. And then, again, the phone surveys is really to make sure the demographics are correct for your community. Step 6 is analyzing the data. I'm just going to show you some examples of this. This is not what necessarily we do for your community, but certainly what we can do for your community, but it includes GIS mapping, cross-tabularization by demographic groups, benchmarking comparisons to other communities, what we call important satisfaction priorities, composite performance indexes. I think this is one of the things that you're going to find is a real strength of our approach is the ability to analyze the data so you can really utilize the data in your day-to-day decision-making, in your strategic planning, and in implementation of the results. And then the next chart that you see is just an example. This is what GIS mapping looks like at the macro level, making sure that we have good distribution of survey respondents. Satisfaction with neighborhood street maintenance. You can see the GIS mapping, the different colors, and where it says potential areas for concerns. We're going to map out your community so that you can see the answers for each question, whether it be in the eastern part of your community, the western part, the northern part of your community, the southern part. And if there's difference in satisfaction depending on the region, we'll be able to show this on the mapping. We're going to be able to give you results, slicing and dicing it by geographic location, by gender, by race, ethnicity, age of respondents, the income level of the respondent, how many years the respondent has lived in the city, the language they speak, whether it be English or whether it be a non-English language. So we're going to be able to break down the results with each one of those to see where people have similar viewpoints, where they have different viewpoints. This is an example. The benchmarking is really to say, what does this information mean? So as an example, if you look at the quality of the city water, sewer, electric utilities at 77%, well, is 77% really good as far as to be very satisfied and satisfied? We're going to be able to compare the overall quality ratings in your community with the quality ratings in the community, similar size tiers nationally and in the northwest part of the country. So you can be able to understand what that number, 77%, really means. Is that a very good number? Is that an average number? Or is that below average number as far as satisfaction? And you can see this next slide is just an example of Independence, Missouri. It's a community we work in. And if you see the circle where it says police, fire, and ambulance, the lowest rated community we've ever done a Directions Finder survey for, 62% of households said that they were very or somewhat satisfied with police, fire, and ambulance services. That's the left-hand side of the horizontal line. The highest rating was 95%. That's best practices rating. If you could see the vertical line, that indicates the average community, and the dot will represent your community. So you can see on that scale where you're going to come in as compared to comparable agencies, satisfaction levels of police, fire, parks and recreation, customer satisfaction, sewer utilities, effectiveness of communication, et cetera. This is just an example of Vancouver versus Northwest region versus the United States. And you can see, again, it's a different way of showing the information to see how do you sit with those in your region, similar sized communities across the United States. And then again, another analysis. This is overall satisfaction with Parks and Recreation. I believe this is for the city of Fort Worth. That's in red. And so this is comparisons head-to-head with a number of communities that they wanted to compare themselves with. You can see right now they're higher satisfaction levels than the average, which is 60%. But if they want to go to best practices, like Tulsa, which is at 71%, it gives them an idea what their potential is. So again, you know what that 63% means. Assessment of priorities. We find that one of the really major things that you're going to get out of this survey is it's going to help you to understand what are the biggest issues facing your community, what are the areas that you need to invest the most dollars in. We know if your community is like others, the needs of your populace far exceed what the financial capabilities are of your community. So it's really important to understand what's the most important thing for you to emphasize, the second most and the third most. And this type of analysis will help you to do that. And then the next one, which is City of Lawrence, one of the things we do for all communities, we're going to divide up every service based upon 4 different matrices. Exceeding expectation, that's where your satisfaction level for service is higher than the importance of that service in your community. Continued emphasis is those are the areas that are highly important to your community and people are really highly satisfied, and you want to make sure that you keep people highly satisfied. And then opportunities for improvements, those are areas that are really highly important to your residents, but maybe their satisfaction level isn't as high as you would like to be. So this is going to be tailored very specifically to your community, overall city services, and then specific to every one of your drilling down services, police, fire, parks and recreation, code enforcement, things of this nature. Every one of those areas is going to get a matrix such as this, so you know what to concentrate on, improvements, and continued emphasis. And then the trends analysis, that's not something we would do this time, but it would be something that we could do in the future. Like in Shoreline, this is the 6th survey that we're going to be doing for them. So we'll be able to trend right from the beginning where they were on certain services, where they are today, and what are the actions that they've taken that has the most impact on satisfaction levels. And then composite satisfaction index. This is something that we developed actually with San Francisco. We've done in King County, where the starting off rating is always 100%. So your base year would be for you 2014. So in every one of those areas, whether it be cultural arts, whether it be in parks and recreation, whether it be in street maintenance, you're going to start with a composite satisfaction index based on 100%. And then in the future, you can move backwards or forwards from that, but it gives you an idea overall how your satisfaction rating changes. This next one is just what we've done with some communities on a quarterly basis. And these are simply examples of what we can do to work with you. And we're going to tailor this specifically to your community. And then the composite customer satisfaction index 2007 to 2009. That's for a community in Florida. We're working with Tamarack, where we compare them with the U.S. averages and also the Florida averages. Then step 7, so we've gone through all the steps of the survey, including I've given you some examples of the analysis, and the final step would be report and presentation. We'll prepare the report. The recommendations will be based upon the analysis specific to your community. We're going to focus on gaps. We're going to focus on priorities. We're going to look at trends in the future. We're going to look at assessments of significant differences between key populations and or geographic areas. We're going to help you in setting realistic expectations for action. Really think there should be no more than 3 to 5 priorities that come up that are what we call the big rocks, the things that you absolutely need to concentrate on to be successful over the next couple of years. I'll be making a presentation to senior staff and to the council, and then we'll deliver the results of the survey in a usable electronic format. The project schedule, this whole survey will take place over a 3-month period of time, beginning, it's May now, but it could still begin in May. June will be the pilot test, and the majority of the administration will take place in June. And then July would be the draft final report presentation to the city, and the final report from there. That's presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have of us.
I have a couple of questions. What population are we trying to sample? Voters or population over 18?
Well, we could do either one. Generally, for a survey of this nature, we recommend that it be a population of 18 or greater, and that you ask a question in the survey, are you a voter, how frequently, so that the community recognizes that you want to survey everyone in the community, whether they're a voter or not, but you want to additionally get that information if they are a voter. So we could do either one, but probably our suggestion would be to do the latter, the 18 and over.
From looking at our voter list, there's a significant, not huge, but significant population that use post office boxes rather than street addresses. And then there's, of course, the famous problem of wired versus wireless. How do you deal with those issues?
Well, there's becoming better and better lists of cell phone users, and we're doing more and more work through the web. So we'll be buying lists that include cell phone providers. We'll be buying lists also of internet providers. We'll be administering the survey through a combination of mail, phone, and the web to the same sampling. So through those three methodologies, we have found that we have the best penetration rate of the various community groups. So what you have is not unusual in today's age. And years ago, our firm started like many firms. We started off as a mail survey firm. Then we moved into a mail phone survey firm. Now, over the last couple of years, we've moved into a mail phone web survey firm. So you have to stay on top of things, and that's one of the advantages of our working across the country. We stay on top of those trends, and we work with providers that have the best list in the country. It's the most current list.
And then there's another interesting difficulty here. If you look at the census figures, the non-Caucasian population is very small and probably substantially exceeded by Caucasians who are Slavs, Russians and Serbs, for example. So the question is, when you look at ethnicity, do you look at census cohorts, or do you have some broader measure?
Well, we generally work with the city and the planning department. I mean, the key thing is, so that's the start. The key thing is it has to be something that you trust and that your community trusts is accurate and representative of the demographics. We have the capabilities to oversample populations, hard-to-reach populations, things of this nature. But our first basis is generally the census, the numbers that you're using in your planning, in your strategic planning, and then we could go from there. But certainly if you think that oversampling is hard to reach is something that should be done, we're going to do that.
That's it, thanks.
Other questions? Dave?
But the key is that you have to feel comfortable, and so we have to establish those baselines right at the beginning.
For a survey such as this, why is it important to delve into ethnicity and race?
Well, it's not important in every single community. I mean, generally, the tipping line is, 10, 15%, depending on how many surveys you do, because you're not going to have statistically valid results unless you capture about 60 to 70 surveys in a specific ethnicity or a specific race. So if your populations are smaller than that, it's not that important. It's really more significant if a population of like if a Hispanic population is 25 or 30%, or African American population is 25 to 30%, then it's a lot more important. Or if we're doing a sampling like of 2,000 residents, but if it's 5-10% with the number that we're doing, that may be a question that you consider optional.
Thank you.
Other questions? David, anything from you?
No, I think we can probably let you go now, Ron, and we'll be in touch.
Very good. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you again. I appreciate your consideration of letting me do this by cell phone.
Thank you very much,
we
Ron.
look forward to working with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the only thing that I didn't think we needed Ron for this part of the conversation. As you saw, the schedule's pretty aggressive. We want to be back to the council in mid-July with the results. And the main impetus for that aggressive schedule is that the deadline for passing a resolution to place anything on the ballot is early in August, very early in August, before your regularly scheduled August meeting. So that would mean that your second meeting in July really would be effectively the deadline for you, unless we were to call a special meeting. And I think it's important to be able to sort of get these results and think about those things and some of the questions that we ask, because we've talked about the levy lid lift, and would this be the year to go out and ask the voters if they want to renew that? And I think it'd be helpful to have the results of this back. You've talked about some other things. So when I talked to the president of the company who got this all together, and Ron is senior vice president who was available to talk to us tonight, he indicated that they could meet that aggressive schedule and that we could definitely do that. However, what that means is here now, if presumably the council authorizes the mayor to sign the professional services agreement on consent this evening, then we will immediately jump into it because the schedule is aggressive. The approach that we would take to gather the council's input and feedback on the first draft of the survey, get your ideas or concerns in that, and iterate that a couple of times. We need to move very nimbly and very quickly. And so our thought in that regard is, instead of this committee approach that we had talked about the last time, was to try an email approach with the council, with me as kind of brokering that and getting the feedback, and then making myself personally available to you so that we could have individual conversations or questions, and I would just make myself infinitely available to you for that, so that we could get this done so that they can get out with the instrument in the first week in June. So I wanted to offer that up as an approach. Last time we met, we had talked about a subcommittee of the council working with me to do that and then bringing it back to the full council. And I just don't know if we'll have the time to make that happen.
I think that's a good approach. My concern about this whole project is that we not create a demand for services that we don't have the money to provide. We're not doing too well on some of our basic services right now. I don't want to create the demand for more services.
Right. And I think one of the great things about this is we gauge the satisfaction that folks have with the various levels of service that we currently have. We gauge their perception of how important those services are, and those types of things can be benchmarked to other communities. But then, and that's sort of the core of it, but then we can ask in any specific area that we would want to, where we want to gauge their interest. For example, in a levy lid lift for fire and EMS services, after you ask them to rate how important it is and how satisfied they are, you can ask them about their willingness to support the current level of service or an enhanced level of service through a revenue option of some kind, so that you don't set up that expectation. By asking that question, you kind of let them know, that we're we're setting up priorities. It can be in the message that goes out, that preliminary message in the automated call. It can also be in the letter that introduces it. You can talk around those things. So we will have that concern in mind when we do the first draft, and then as you take a look at it, if you think it is leading it that way, then we can try to work with it so that we don't set that up, because I think that is an important, we have to be realistic about this.
Better have it in the message and the letter.
Yeah,
It takes more than once.
right.
I have a very similar concern that, for example, if, to kind of underline it, if somebody said, well, street repair is number one, that costs $500,000 a year or more. On the other hand, if even a smaller number thought that pickleball courts were very important, and that could be done for $40,000, just simply saying which is more important isn't helpful. There was a scenario training that I think Joyce and I went to. They did a very interesting thing when they did their survey. They actually did it with focus groups. What they did is they gave people a cup full of poker chips and then said, okay, put your chips, spend your chips where you want to. And I think that's a very interesting approach for a survey, is you give somebody, you say, okay, here you've got $100. Where do you spend it?
We did that kind of a thing at the, in our outreach for the strategic plan. There weren't a lot of people that came to the venues, but you may recall we had the cups and the chips, and you can put them all in one cup.
Right.
Or you can put one in each cup,
Right.
yes. I believe that the way this is designed, and when we have that first draft, you can take a look, I don't believe that we ask for a rank ordering 1 through 50 or 1 through 20 of the various services. They're asked from a perceptions perspective, how would you rate this service? And I think it's 5 points, so very not important or somewhat not important, important and very important. And then you can find out, and hopefully what you don't get is that every single one we do is very important, but you'll get a breakdown. And I can't remember what slide it was. I always forget how to stop the presentation. It showed how this one. No, okay. First, second, and third choice. So there was a little bit of a rank ordering there. And then there was this other one. It was on satisfaction, where they gave their satisfaction score.
And that's the one that leaped out at me, because indubitably the quality of library services total budget is maybe 10% of the total emergency services budget.
Right. And that's one thing to keep in mind is the results of this survey are one tool that is available to the council. And I think it's always important to remind too, and I think they'll talk about it when they make the report. You have to understand the context of the timing and when the survey was conducted. And over time, if you know, this is kind of a best practice for communities to do these and to benchmark, just to get to have a feel. If you ask the question, if the folks are responding to a survey the day after a 3 to 5% stock market crash, that can influence the way that they answer versus they answer the questions the day after, like today, where we've got 2 of the major indices at record highs. And so it's just...
Slight changes in the phrasing of questions can dramatically alter the
Right.
results.
So it's data, and it's important. We need to be cognizant of these bias concerns that can come up and how meaningful the data will be. And so this type of feedback will be really good as we bring these questions to you in the first draft. Take a look at those and see if the concern is mitigated, and if not, we can work with Ron and then Chris, who's the president, and there's a woman named Grace, I believe, that'll be working with us and try to make it better.
What specifically do you want to know? What, from the results of something like this? What?
I am,
Tools for the administration of the city.
I am very much looking forward to getting data similar to what you see right here on this chart, so that we have a feel as a baseline for how the community thinks we're doing on the services that we're providing. I'm very interested in what does that mean and how that stacks up against similar communities across the country that are about our size. It's very helpful because you could get, we may think that we're not doing a very good job in a particular area and get feedback that says that we are. And then additionally, in terms of importance, we can impose as an organization what we think is important upon, and work along those lines and find something that comes back from the survey that says something different. And maybe it would help us to refocus. And I believe this is a very, very helpful. I think I chatted with a couple council members who had seen a presentation on this. It's a common tool. It's a great graphic that helps you know, yep, we need to keep doing this. Maybe we need to refocus a little here. Maybe we could back off a little bit here. But again, it's just a tool. And then I think very specifically, it will be helpful to ask about a TBD in this and figure out exactly how to craft that. I don't know how we craft that yet. And I think to ask about a levy lid lift, potentially to ask about dedicated parks funding as well, so that we can bring that information to the council as you consider the priorities and the prioritization in our budgeting process and know where to put emphasis. And it helps the mayor in terms of presenting a budget to the council. So I'm pretty excited to do this. I think it's the best practice. I think it'll be very helpful for us.
Okay, Joe?
Will you go to slide 16, please? The thing that jumped out at me was that very first one where it says quality city water, sewer, electric utilities. So how does it skew the question when you say, okay, nobody's happy with their water rates? Are they going to answer that, I'm not happy that they charge me so much, I like my taste of my water, good service. So, you know what I'm saying?
You could do it in two different questions if you wanted.
Yeah, something like that. Finances sometimes skews the results when we're really asking, are we serving you well? We're not asking, are you happy paying for it?
Right.
At this price.
Right.
I don't know.
And that's not the question. That's just the little
That's-
short thing that they list in order to present it to you.
Uh-huh.
What the precise question is, I'd have to look at this survey.
It might have been in a 2 or 3 part question.
Right. And we are limited to how
That's
many
fair.
questions we can have. We're paying for a survey that's supposed to fit on 4 pages. It's roughly a 10 or so minute survey. And we can afford that. We can't afford the longer ones. And the risk of going longer is you lose people and they don't want to do it. So they won't take it. They'll tell you no. Hey, I'm from, helping the city. Do you have 10 minutes to help us on a survey? If you say, do you have 20 minutes to help us on a survey, they might say no.
Go out the room screaming.
Right. But that's a good point. I think that's why it's important to remember that this shouldn't be the only thing that you use to make a decision. It's a tool, but it will be a statistically significant, scientifically valid survey.
Yeah, maybe this isn't the appropriate place to make this comment, but where it says overall quality of police, fire, ambulance services, I think the police should be separate.
Separate it out.
Because everybody loves firemen. People have different opinions about police. Somehow that should not be lumped together. And they're 2 different departments
Yeah,
for us.
and that's
actually.
easy to do.
Yeah.
Yep.
You still gotta stay within that.
As long as we stay
Questions.
within. And I think what we'll find is that our portfolio of services is almost as full service as you could be, but it's not as full service as some of the other communities. And then there's this balancing act. They have this trademark benchmarking, he used the word in here, they have this trademark benchmarking product that is part of the package, which is why they're very competitive in pricing. And so we work with that and then kind of expand outside of that to customize it. And that is included in the pricing through the surrogate for pricing, which is the length of the survey. So we'll do everything we can to be as customized and unique and split things out. If we find, if the feedback that you have through the process is, wow, this just isn't quite enough, boy, if we could do the 15-minute one, we could do that through a supplemental with the company. It'd be another $2,000. So for every 5 minutes, it's another $2,000 because they have to pay people to spend more time on it.
Is this, if we do it this year, then would you do a follow-up like every 2 or 3 years so that you have, so that the city has this information over a period of time for the feedback of how the city is performing?
Yes, it would be my recommendation, I haven't talked to Sean about this specifically, but we've talked about it informally, but it would be my recommendation that this become one of our practices. And you don't have to stay with the same firm, but it certainly, there's benefit to staying with the same firm. And I have experience in other communities where it was a 2-year interval that coincided to some extent with a biennial budget process, but 2 years is a little bit of time. You could stretch a little bit farther than that to try to control the costs if you wanted to. But I think it is a best practice. And then as different issues pop up, you're asking the same questions over and over so you get that trend analysis, see how you're doing. And he talked about that. But then you can add in specific questions based on what's coming, what's the hot issue or what's going on.
I think it's a great idea.
I missed too, are we surveying all adults or just registered voters or likely voters? What are we?
So
are we
it's
surveying?
not a political poll in the sense that it's
I know.
likely voters or registered voters. What their recommendation is based upon how they get the lists through a variety of sources is that it is to be a sample that would be representative of all adults in the community, but you're not surveying all adults, but it would be a sample that would be representative. And I think the number is somewhere between 300 and 400 sample size, and then 400, then we will have a statistically significant sample. But that you ask the question, are you a registered voter? And so that when they do their cross tabulations, you will know the results for every question for the set of that which is registered voters.
And that will be inaccurate because many people will say they are and they're not, or they aren't when they are. So that's a good sample. A 400 sample is a good sample.
And that's a guaranteed sample.
And my experience has been in political polling. And I know that's not the purpose of this, and I support surveying non-voters as well because we're here for everybody and not just voters in the city.
Right.
But what surprises me, and I went on to my margin of error calculator, that the margin of error is so high in a jurisdiction as small as Washougal, and you're surveying 400 people.
95.
It came out 4.79%.
Right. A confidence interval of 95% is a fairly standard confidence interval on an instrument like this.
That's pretty high. I would think that normal kind of opinion polling, you're probably happy with an 80%. If you're going to publish an academic paper, then you might want to be 95, or do life and death medical surveys, but 95 is a pretty high standard.
Yeah, I think if they can deliver a 95% confidence interval for us, and I'm not a statistical, I had a class in my program, and I know that they wanted us to always have 95%, and so we did our math based on that.
I got a C in that class.
I'm not going to say what I got then.
Let me
that bad, eh?
No, it was good.
Let me put it this way. People who are making $1 million salaries as quants are happy with 75%.
So
So yeah, it'd be great to get 400.
How many is going to have to come back in order to get that
We need 400.
400 back?
Yes.
Oh, I thought you were saying
400
Oh, yeah,
respondent,
It's based on that one.
Actual responses,
actual responses, right? So,
qualified responses.
right. One of the things I liked about this firm's approach is they did that pilot, and they kicked the tires on it,
Yeah.
just to make sure there are no fatal flaws. And the core of their survey has been administered literally thousands of times across the country, and they're generating results for communities, all sizes, all shapes and sizes. So they're versatile in terms of working with all different sorts of companies. They have a proven track record, and they have shaped some of these questions to meet the demands of rigor so that they are statistically significant. Yet, they're flexible enough to work with us to customize it and working with local councils and staff so that we feel confident about what they're doing for us. So I think it'll be great.
So, yes, thank you. So we don't need to go out for bid on this or the contract?
No, this is a professional service, and so the approach that we took is we communicated with a couple of firms and asked them to submit proposals, and both firms, competent, qualified, pricing and details made the difference between the two. This is the most cost-effective, and we get the most for our funds. Some references. The references were positive for both of the firms
Okay,
that
that's
I was
good.
talking
That's
to.
what I wanna
Yeah. So,
Comparison to prices for other firms?
about 5,000 more for the other one, without some of the things that I think are important in the process. They had a couple things maybe I didn't think were as so. But primarily it was on the cost. We have $18,000 in this line item, and we don't want to spend it all on this. I talked to you about $13,000 the last time. This is about $1,500 higher, but there were a couple features that they could provide. One of the things I really want to point out, I know it's not ideal to have a voice on the phone. They are not charging us for the presentation as part of this. If they come, it's $1,500 plus all of their expenses, and they're going to do it as part of this.
Based where?
They're in Kansas.
Do
Our
surveys
home state.
In
do surveys in
Houston.
Kansas?
They are,
That's just where they're based.
they are
They
That's
just
why he's in Illinois now.
Olaf,
I have friends.
Olaf.
Olaf, yeah.
Lathan.
Oh, like,
Olathe?
Yeah,
Olathe.
they're there. But they also apparently have facilities in Houston and Phoenix. Ron is in Illinois. I think Chris, who's the president, who does the same things, is somewhere else.
I saw a survey in Lawrence there, and that must be Lawrence, Kansas. So they do surveys in Kansas.
Yes, I think they have
They do.
quite a
I
clientele.
have friends that live in Lawrence, so.
The map they have
Is that
is of
town?
Arlington, Virginia, and I don't see that up there.
They didn't give us everything on
Yeah.
the list. Yeah, they've
Yeah,
done
there are a lot of dots on that.
400 cities.
Several in Northwest.
Yeah.
Yep. I know, there's a Cracker
So-
Barrel there.
Other questions?
there you go.
There's
I
a
did get the Cracker Barrel there.
We will,
Cracker Barrel.
we'll get a draft out to you as soon as we possibly can.
Thank you.
And if you think of any other questions in the meantime or concerns, just call me, please. We'll look forward to chatting with you about it.
Okay. Got no public here except for Dawn. I've got nothing for you at this point,
She
council
stuck it
members.
out with us.
How about this thing on discount pricing for combined burials?
We
Already
talked
done
about that earlier.
Oh, okay,
First
sorry,
time.
okay.
Okay,
We switched them around because the gentleman with the presentation wasn't ready
if there's no
Oh,
other
he's-
items,
en route, and so we did it in the opposite
See you at
order.
7.
we are adjourned until 7 o'clock.